Joining me now, of course, is my friend, Judge Michael Luttig, a former judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Judge Luttig, welcome back to the show. I had chills listening to your speech last week. You invited me to be there for it, in which you issued a calling that now is the time to use all tools at our disposal to fight tyranny, not simply voting every 2 years.
For the first time in 10 years, Ali, I not only have hope, today I have confidence that America is going to prevail and long endure. Today is another America time of testing. That time has come to us, our generation. And I believe that February 2026 will be remembered as the turning point in America, when Americans once again declared their independence from tyrannical rule. America has had several times of testing, as you alluded to, times that have tried men's souls, in the words of Thomas Paine. The most notable, of course, being at its founding 250 years ago, but also at the time of the Civil War and the Civil Rights era in the 1960s and 70s, and now today. At every time of testing, Americans summoned the courage to speak truth to power in order originally to secure their liberty and their freedoms and their self-government. And then thereafter, over the past 250 years, to retain and resecure their liberty and their government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These several times of testing, Ali, over the past 250 years have now all converged into the times in which we are living in America today. Indeed, they've converged into this very day, even into this very month of February 2026.
Judge, I want to go back to 2021, January 5th, in which you posted a tweet. It was the first of a 7-tweet thread in which you said the only responsibility and power of the vice president under the Constitution is to faithfully count the Electoral College votes as they have been cast. Seems like an obvious thing to say, but that was an important message. That was directed to support Mike Pence in not doing Donald Trump's bidding. That tweet perhaps may have changed the course of history. You paid a price for that. And I think that's important because right now Americans are realizing that in order to uphold their democracy, and I agree with you, I'm hopeful, but they are understanding that there is a price to pay. We've already seen 2 lives lost in those shootings in Minneapolis. You paid a price for saying something that was just obvious.
Well, Ali, that's really beside the point. The real point is that almost anyone in America could have tweeted the very same words that I tweeted. So basic was the proposition that under the Constitution of the United States of America, an incumbent president cannot ignore the will of the American people and attempt to overturn that election. But it was Mike Pence, then Vice President of the United States of America, who was the hero of that day and of those times in America. It was really his courage that stood up for the United States of America and all that we've ever held dear.
Let me ask you about this ruling yesterday from the Supreme Court. It was on a narrow issue of tariffs and taxation, and one that no one was particularly surprised at It evolved in the way it should have evolved. Donald Trump thereafter had a remarkable press conference. You spoke to the New York Times about this, in which you said, before the entire world, it was the president's most spectacular display yet of his utter disrespect for the Constitution and his contempt for the Supreme Court of the United States. Tell me about what you saw happening yesterday.
Well, Ali, I, like millions and millions of others around the world, I watched every second of that spectacular display by the President of the United States. And it's really the words before the entire world in that New York Times quote that we should focus on. Before the entire world, the President of the United States held that hour-long press conference in which he displayed spectacularly, yet again, his utter disrespect and contempt for the Constitution and for the Supreme Court of the United States in the plainest language, unequivocal language, frightening language to the world and to the American people. I believe that that press conference, not the Supreme Court's decision and not what could have been the president's response to that decision, but the press conference that will define this president and his presidency for all of American history.
You talk about this disrespect for the court. It was also pretty personal. He issued disrespect toward the justices themselves, including two whom he had appointed. You've talked about this for a long time. There are implications to using this sort of language about judges. And we have seen threats to judges. Amy Coney Barrett's family has suffered because of this. You feel that that's an important line that the president keeps crossing?
Yes, with emphasis on keeps crossing. You know, as I said publicly and even on your show a little over a year ago, on his first day back in office, the president declared war on the rule of law and the federal judiciary. And he's viciously waged that war against the federal judiciary in particular every day since, up to yesterday. Vicious, unprecedented in all of American history. And it may be unprecedented in the history of the world, Ali. I can't imagine any other world leader speaking of that country's Supreme Court in the way that the President of the United States did yesterday. It was vicious, ad hominem. I mean, he called the court a disgrace. You know, he even went so far by the end of the press conference to say that the families of the justices who ruled against him should be ashamed of their family member. I believe that's correct because when I heard those words, Ali, I just shivered for America.
So when I asked you last week about what to do for America, everybody has a different way of doing this, but you did believe that at this point, voting is, as you said to me, voting is necessary but not sufficient. And when I said, what's the extra part, you said that we're going to have to take to the streets en masse. We're going to have to protest peacefully, calmly, nonviolently, but that is now something that is heard and understood that is important.
Yes, that gets back to the way I described the moment at the top of this show and my remarks to the City Bar of New York. It's because of the confluence of the events of this past month in particular, the horrific events in Minneapolis, the Super Bowl halftime show protesting Donald Trump's immigration and deportation policies, and then the tariff decision yesterday and the president's press conference on the Supreme Court's tariff decision. This particular confluence of events over the past month has brought America to, and I believe beyond, the tipping point. And what has happened through all of American history when Americans have been brought to that tipping point and beyond? Well, we know it began with the founders of this great nation. You know, they summoned the courage to dissent to protest, if you will, and even to wage war against the tyranny that beset the founders at that time, waged a war, the Revolutionary War, Allie, to secure the freedoms and liberties and the rights and the self-government that we have today embodied in the Constitution of the United States. And then thereafter, in the Civil War, same thing. Americans summoned up their courage to protest and dissent from injustice. And then so again in the 60s and 70s, led by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., every moment in the past 250 years when America itself was at a crossroads, at a moment in which, as Abraham Lincoln said, America might no longer endure, Americans have risen. They've summoned the courage from within, from deep within, to dissent and protest against the evil, whether from within or from without, of the United States of America. That's what I believe we are witnessing today. And that's why I said at the top of the show, for the first time in 10 years, Allie, I have not just hope, but I have the belief that we have come to the turning point and that America and Americans are going to answer the call from our founders and ancestors to defend the United States of America.